Introducing Skagit Intermediate lines. Tom Larimer is one of the guys from the Great Lakes that's been telling me about Skagit Intermediate lines and how important they are for helping you catch fish. And I said, well, dude, we got enough lines. We don't need another line. Tom's like, there is a difference here and it's important. So Airflo, with the help of Tom and a bunch of his buddies from the Great Lakes, worked on a new series of lines. Whew! I think we spent over a year making this family of lines happen. So Tom is going to tell you all about Airflo's Skagit Intermediate heads.
We started working on the Skagit Intermediate after having conversations with some of our guide friends back in the Great Lakes. In fact, we even went back and took a trip and fished with those guys to just see what the challenges were of their fisheries. And the overwhelming consensus was that most of their runs, they have a lot of irregular bottom contours, so they get a lot of upwelling. So they needed a line that could cast big sink tips, heavy flies, and fish deep and slow while still in control. So the Skagit Intermediate is very similar to our Skagit Compact. It's slightly shorter. The tapers are very similar. But the biggest difference is the rear 6 feet of this is floating. And then it transitions into the intermediate section. We even thought about the color in all this because most of the time in the Great Lakes they're fishing under some pretty clear water conditions. So we've got kind of a Scandi blue in the back, which gives you great contrast. You can see the line and you can track it, and then it transitions in the intermediate into sort of a blue herring gray for stealth. So the real beauty of this line is it gives you a very easy casting line that is easy to lift out of the water, but you still get a nice slow tight swing to the fly, and it gets you below those complex surface currents. So even though this line was designed for the Great Lakes, we found it's a great line out here for the West Coast steelhead fisheries or even for Chinook salmon. Anywhere where you need to get your fly down deep or through complex surface currents, it's a great choice.
So your buddies are making fun of you because you don't own an Airflo Skagit Intermediate head. So when you run to your local store and you buy one of these things, you're going to notice a black loop at the back of the head, because black loops show up better in low light conditions because you'll see a contrast between the head and the running line. So always remember, black is back. The front of these lines, they're kind of a dark gray, kind of stealthy color. And on the front of that, it prints exactly what this head is. This says Skag Comp 540i. It's a Skagit Compact Intermediate. It also has a small color band. This one's orange. So if you don't want to read what it says, you'll know right away my orange one's this size, and they make all these different colors. The loop-to-loop connections allows me to put my sink tip on, and these lines are low stretch. They really set up well, good casting. They're also made out of polyurethane, and that's something unique to Airflo. Urethane's awesome stuff. They paint boats with it. I'm sure something went to the moon that was made out of polyurethane. In my world, what it means is there's no liquid used during the manufacturing. Better for the environment, nothing to dry out and crack, chemically, UV resistant, stuff just lasts forever. Complementing that, I would recommend that you go ahead and use some sort of loop-to-loop. Airflo uses I recommend a 30-pound running line for your heavier rods, 20-pound ridged floating running line for your smaller stuff, and your sink tips. These lines will handle anything from T7 all the way up to the heaviest T18 tips. All of Airflo's heads now, instead of a spool and a box and all that crap that you end up throwing in the garbage, all of our lines come in a Ziploc baggie, so you don't need to throw away the spool. And the Ziploc baggie, it's heavy duty, reinforced, the grommets are not metal. That makes sure your stuff doesn't rust out. And you'll be able to drop all your Skagit Compacts and some extra sink tips into your Airflo head bag. So with the Skagit Intermediate, we got you covered. It's a simple system to use, and they range in 450 grains all the way up to 720 grains. So from your like 6 weights up to your 10 weight lines, we got a Skagit Intermediate that matches your stick.
So if you grab the Skagit Intermediate, here's a couple tips on casting and fishing. The biggest one is you have to remember that this line is going to be sunk considerably deeper than what you're used to on your regular Skagit. Now, as a side note, a lot of times you can get away with a smaller sink tip or a shorter sink tip than what you're used to fishing in certain runs because that line will help you get down. But because that line is deep, if you're a beginner to this, you may find it easier to roll cast it to the surface, then do your setup and make your cast. With that said, most advanced casters, you're not going to have any problem lifting this line out of the water because that rear 6 feet of the line really helps keep the back of the line up. The big thing is be very distinct with your lift, smooth and slow, use your bottom hand, and be patient. Let the fly come to the surface before you make your setup. So once you get your cast out there, a couple things you'll notice about this line. I love how this line cuts deep and digs down through the surface currents, but you still have control because of the back of that head being floating. But you will find that you probably don't need to cast quite as square to the current. In other words, you can cast a little further downriver, which gives you a nice slow swing as it comes across, because that intermediate will help you get below the surface. So you don't need to make these big casts across and mend and feed line quite as much. This line will do all the work for you.
So if you're fishing in a situation where straight to the fly, down deeper, slower swing speed is important, now you know what line to get. It's the Airflo Skagit Intermediate.